Hi Phil, thanks for the footage and just a quick review of where you started versus where you are now. A few highlight a few areas within the swing where you've made some marked improvements, and also just highlight a few areas that may look different. And I would actually prefer to see what you were doing in the initial footage, but as is often the case when you start working on something new, one or two things creep in. Through no fault of your own, it's just because your focus is elsewhere. So I'm just going to highlight those before we crack on with what I'd like you to do during the next few weeks in regards to changing your swing and moving it in the right direction. So first and foremost, really like the foot flare. Your foot flare, we said last time, should be a minimum of about 25 degrees. I think was the number we used, 20 to 25 degrees. It's going to help with your knees, your pelvis, etc., which we discussed. And you'll see as we get to the top of your backswing, you're starting to see some benefits of that. When you do flare the feet out, you tend to introduce a little bit more, your ability to rotate improves. So if you were going to rotate more, you've also got to be able to extend and side bend a little bit more. And again, you're going to see sort of some knock-on effects of that external or that extra rotation, but you've still not figured out how to extend and side bend quite as much as you need to at the minute, but that's pretty straightforward to sort out. And I just thought I'd sort of highlight this before we move on to the work that I'd like us to do next. So better foot flare, could do with standing maybe a touch wider in both instances, but certainly liking the foot flare better. When we start looking at the swing and the movement away, you start to see on the right that the head sort of goes down and across a little bit more than it did in your original footage. So this is the added rotation brought about from altering the foot positioning, working on the drill that we've done last time with that right foot drawn back. It's just increasing the rate at which you rotate. Now, anatomically with the body, we're doing three things during the backswing, and well, three things at any part of the swing. We're always doing three things anatomically. During the backswing, we are rotating, we are extending, and we are side bending. So when we see the head move across and down like that, it's a sign that the player's turning more, but not quite extending and side bending enough. You can see here that and these are nice little keys to just get back on track. The ear is down a little bit more, the chest is up a little bit more. Here the chest is down, the ear's sitting pretty level. So, chest to the sky, ear to the ground, be a nice little backswing key for you. Certainly that pelvis on that right hip is getting much deeper, much sooner. So initially you've got more rotation in there, more depth to the swing, which you'll see when we go down the line. But we've just got to figure how to sort of extend this spine a little bit more. And as we extend more, we've got to side bend more. So you're always doing three things during the swing anatomically. Throughout the swing, depending where you are in the swing, depends what three things you're doing. But at this moment in time, is it realistic to expect to see the rate at which you rotate increase and start to sort of damage your sequencing a little bit in regards to staying more stable in the backswing? 100%. So I'm not really worried about that too much. Another nice little drill you could do to just tidy that up, because that's all this is really, it's just a tidying up process, is when you are practicing, position a sort of cane on the ground or a club on the ground between the feet, and just try and make sure that as you turn over the top of that cane rather than drifting ever so slightly behind that cane. Now in your initial footage, because of the way you stood to the golf ball, because of the way you used your arms, the amount of rotation you were creating was quite limited. So therefore the extension and the side bend was complementing that. The head was pretty stable. Now that you're turning more and you're getting more depth, you just got to figure out the other two pieces. But that's a sequencing thing. It's not a big issue. It's just something that I wanted to bring to your attention before we crack on with any further work. As we get to P4, you can see now how much more the shoulders have travelled throughout the backswing. We've got lead shoulder, trail shoulder will be obscured by head obviously. Here we've got lead shoulder, trail shoulder. So much more travel in the shoulders. You You can see already that the arms don't look as lifted. They look like they're working behind you more. And the amount of differential between the knees is quite marked here as well. We talked about how the knees were a sort of linkage and how they were going to impact massively on your ability to get the club from P1 to P4 in an efficient and an appropriate manner. What I really like in this is the change you're making now as we get further into the downswing. Club's not getting thrown away from you quite as much, quite as soon. Certainly not going to be as steep when you view it from down the line. You're going to see a marked difference. But the move through the ball here, you can see you start to sort of add some flex to the knees, add some flex to the spine and the neck. Pelvis is very flexed at this point to try and sort of stop that club getting flung away from you too much. So there's a lot of contradictory sort of moves going on to just try and make this golf ball go straight. Now as we come through, we're extending, rotating and hitting out. We're turning. Now we're not turning enough. I'm going to touch on this in today's session, but we're certainly looking less flexed as we come through. We just take it back to sort of right arm parallel. You start to see some marked differences in the way the lower body's working and the way the chest and the hips are separating. So here we've got the sort of chest staying over the centre of the pelvis, centre of the shoulder turn, centre of the pelvis. Here we've got much more separation between the two. So that's the tucking of the hips part of the system that you hear people discuss. Is starting to get into your swing already. The issue you had on the left was that you were so busy extending, you couldn't really sort of turn. You couldn't afford to slide any more than you were doing. So your sequencing's starting to calm down a little bit. And again, we'll go through down the line footage and we'll talk a little bit more now about the improvements you made in that area before we move on. Okay, so down the line, what I like here already, that Boulder Drill, that drawing the right foot back, started to creep its way into your actual swing. Notice how the stance is not quite as open. So the stance line's a little bit square. It's not a big issue, but it's just something, again, that drill's creeping its way in, helping with your alignment. We talked about being a little bit less wristy on the way back. See there how much shallower the club sets. So the club head doesn't get as high as quick. Now the big thing here was to try and get the hands deeper at the top, not as lifted, feeling like the butt of the club was behind the trail shoulder, not above the trail shoulder. And we talked about the impact this had on the elbow and the shoulder, so we're looking a little bit more externally rotated P4, which is great. And then the big thing then was to try and get this player on the left to be far less steep in transition. So we were looking at a shaft that was hitting you obviously well above the trail shoulder, and from there that requires you to pull the chest away through the hip to prevent the club swinging further and further left throughout the downswing. So the only way you're going to prevent yourself from hitting big pulls, big cuts from there, is by extending very quickly. You see the heel lifting, the knee driving towards the ball, the pelvis tucking under, all the stuff we talked about last time. So we just go back to P5. Working on the Boulder Drill, trail foot drawn back. When you're doing the drill, it looks even better than this. So we're going to keep doing that drill. What I'm going to do today when we do the body of work is I'm going to elaborate and tweak that drill, or elaborate on that drill and tweak it to suit, rather than move away from that too much. Okay, so I still want you to carry on doing the drill. But you see how now the shaft is starting to hit below the level of the shoulder. You can see now also the shaft is much less between the arms, and he's starting to try and work its way onto that trail arm at 5.5. Sweet spot more in rather than being out. So what you've done here now is you've removed the need to pull away. You've removed the need to extend the hell out of it from P4 to P7. Now that doesn't mean you're going to stop doing that overnight. That's an unrealistic sort of assumption. But what it's going to do, you've removed the need to do it, so you can start to look at some different sequencing. The trail knee is definitely calming down. It's definitely not driving towards the ball quite as much. We're still tucking under. The right heel's still popping up, and the chest is still pulling away. I'm not going to tell you otherwise. But from that position you're in now at P5, there's much less need to make those moves, and you're in a position where you can start to learn the correct sequence and start to appreciate the correct sequence a little bit more, and therefore start to remove that pulling away sort of look that you've always had, that you've always disliked about your golf swing, and really start to calm down some of the chaos that brings. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through some sort of areas in the swing that you need to appreciate. I want to have a quick discussion about, and then I'm going to give you a few drills and thoughts to work on going forward. Okay, so here we've got Charlie again up at the side of you. I'm pretty sure we used Charlie in lesson 1. Great example for you of great visual for you of where to put the club in relation to the trail shoulder at P4. You're certainly moving in that direction. You can see the knees are changing flex now in a very similar manner. Hips and shoulders turn on a tilted angle, courtesy of what the knees are doing, etc., etc. Hand path much better than it was. And what I want to touch on here is the sequence of things, because one of the things I picked up on in your initial text was that you've always struggled with early extension. There is a certain sequence that the body should be making throughout the swing. We touched on this earlier about always doing 3 things anatomically throughout the swing. So from P1 to P4, both yourself and Charlie have extended, rotated, and side bend. So there is a turning, an extending, and a side bending occurring during the backswing. And that's, if you do that at the correct rate, do all 3 incrementally, your head will stay pretty stable throughout the backswing. There's also a sequence in transition, and then from round about P5.5, P6 to the end of the swing, or towards the end of the swing, that you need to appreciate as well. So if during the backswing Charlie has extended, side bent, and rotated, then what he must do is during the early part of the downswing, he must reverse that process. So he's going to rotate the opposite way. He's going to start to slide his hips, and he's going to start to return to flexion. So as Charlie's hips slide, his side bend starts to change. If he wasn't returning to his forward bend by 5.5, so you can see there now he's almost back in his address flex, which is what the red line along the torso was, then you would start to see issues in regards to where his head was within that box. So when we look at someone like yourself who pulls away pretty quick, head comes out the box pretty fast, we've seen from the face-on footage that you definitely slide your hips. But the problem is, as you rightly said, you feel like your early extension. Now, this is my issue here, right? Is the player on the right early extending, or is it that he doesn't understand he has to return back to his forward bend in transition? In my experience is it's the latter. Most guys who have early extension in their minds as an issue continuously think extension is a problem. Extension is not an issue during the golf swing. We've got to extend. It's just that at some point we've got to be replacing that extension with some flexion before extending again. Now this is something that's really sort of really beneficial, if we get together after shutdown and get to do some proper hands-on work. this is a really good session to talk about things and just show you some of the graphs, the 3D stuff. Not sounds like a lot of detail, but actually you can break it down in a very simple manner. So Charlie's extended on the way back and he's returning to his forward bend. So ignore the hip slide and the rotation at this point. He's extended and then he's returned to his forward bend. You have extended. Now we know that you don't stand up because the lead shoulder works down, so that's what makes the head stay in the box. But rather than returning to your forward bend, you start to continue to extend. So Charlie's going from extension to flexion, you're going from extension to more extension. So is it early extension or is it a failure to return to the forward bend? It's much better to concentrate your attention on that than continuously trying to battle early extension, because that's what early extension is. Early extension is a failure to return to your forward bend in transition. Now, you've had to do that out of necessity because the shaft has never been mid-bicep at P5, as we see with Charlie. Now that the shaft is starting to get into a more appropriate position, you can start to learn how to sequence the downswing differently, and particularly that transition from 4 to 5.5 is very, very important for you going forward. And I'm going to get some stuff up now. I'm going to put a few comparisons up, give you a few key areas to focus on, and then start throwing some drills at you. Okay, so what we're looking at here is the lead shoulder. Lead shoulder is the center of the arc, and controlling this and appreciating what this does throughout the backswing and downswing can help you dramatically in your goal to reduce the amount of early extension stroke inability to return to your forward bend, and also sort of really tighten up your shot pattern when you're out playing golf. So I've marked where the lead shoulder is, obviously with the red arrow at P1. I'm going to discuss where it should be at P6 as we go through this sequence, and you'll see a stark comparison between yourself and Robert Rock. The footage of Robert Rock here is very, very clear and good in regards to this lead shoulder, but there is, very early in the swing, a little bit of camera wobble. So when I get it to P6, it's not going to be exactly as I'm describing, but it's going to be there or thereabouts. So just bear that in mind. So trajectory of the lead shoulder, P1 to P4, should be downwards and around. So down and around, down and around. Turning, extending, tilting. Turning, extending, tilting. So that's the shoulder down aspect of stack and tilt. Now in your case, we get a pretty good start going where we work the shoulder down. See how we start drifting across a little bit. Lead shoulder levels out a little bit more, and then certainly from here on in, from P2, maybe 2.5 onwards, the shoulder trajectory just levels out a little bit more abruptly, which is when you start to move off the ball a little bit more. So if we just take Robert back to P3, centre of the shoulder turn, it's pretty much bang in line with the centre of the stance. In your case, the centre of the shoulder turn has just drifted off slightly. That's not something you historically did. It's just something that you've started doing as the amount that you turn has increased. So you were turning, extending and tilting, and as the turning increases, the extension and the tilt must increase also to complement that. Stick the cane on the ground, feel like you're turning over the top of it. You'll get that back easy because you've always done that anyway. So moving on to what the lead shoulder does now in transition, what you're going to see with Robert Rock is you're going to see that the lead shoulder works pretty level from 4 to 5. So from 4 to 5, the trajectory of the lead shoulder is relatively level. And then from 5 to 6, it starts to raise upwards. And at P6, this is where I was talking about the camera wobble before, at P6, the lead shoulder should be on pretty much the same level as it was at P1. But the main thing is that you see the sort of trajectory of that lead shoulder. So from 4 to 5, level, from 5 to 6, forward and up gradually. Now if we compare that to the trajectory of your lead shoulder, up, 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 up. Four to 5. Way too much upwards, way too soon. By the time you get to 5.5, the shoulder's almost sort of back to where it was at P1. And then as you carry on at P6, you can see how much higher that lead shoulder's gone. If we just bring it back down to sort of, we'll go just after impact and we'll freeze Rocky at the same place. You know, you consider where his shoulder is compared to yours relative to where you started. So we need to give that some appreciation, because that lead shoulder is the arc, center of the arc. As that gets too high too quick, that means the arms have got to straighten out too much too soon, which means that the arc is changing too dramatically. Now if the arc is changing too dramatically, the club face is going to be difficult to control. We talked a little bit about that in your first session, and there's also going to be a tendency to miss hit too many shots. You notice that a lot of the most consistent ball strikers, that right arm is still relatively soft as they're hitting the golf ball. So we need to manage that a little bit better than we've got at the minute, and than we're doing at the moment. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. It doesn't have to look like anybody else, but it has to demonstrate certain commonalities that are apparent amongst all consistent ball strikers. So what I'm going to do now is get a little visual up that I used during a lesson recently, just to give you an idea of how this helps in regards to that sort of inability to return to forward bend, coming up out of the ground too quick, early extension, call it whatever you like, but ultimately it's an inability to return to flexion from P4 to P5.5. Okay, so following on from the lead shoulder discussion, this was during a session with one of my guys who has a major history of failing to return to forward bend, early extending, pulling away, chaotic ball flight, etc. And he had no appreciation of what the lead shoulder was doing or what it should be doing in transition, and the potential impacts that can have on your ball flight. So stuck a couple of alignment canes through my one through my belt loops at the front, and the other through the body warmer that I was wearing through the shoulders, just to demonstrate some sort of tilts to him. And it wound up being a pretty good visual, and I think you'll appreciate this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this video through a few times whilst running your swing from 4 to 5.5, just to give you a visual first and foremost. Shoulder down, shoulder up. And when you watch this, you certainly resemble one player more than the other. You can see how when the cane goes up, that's that early extension that you talk about. When the cane goes down, that's me returning to forward bend. You can see it has an impact on the way the pelvis looks, the way the trail knee works. Now all I'm trying to do on the left hand side is keep the shoulder down as opposed to raise the shoulder up. Now, I'm going to elaborate on the Boulder Drill a little bit more for you now, and I'm going to leave that running on the left hand side. What I'd like you to continue to do is work with the right foot drawn back. However, whilst doing that, I want you to do one particular thing. I want you to feel like you're going to create a lower ball flight. So you're going to draw the right foot back, same drill as before. You're going to feel like you're going to hit these balls much lower into your net. So where that ball's launching sort of midway up the net, probably favouring the right hand side a little bit as well, which is to be expected, especially when you draw that right foot back. What I want you to feel like is that you're going to flight these things lower and more in the centre of the net. So if you consider that move that I'm making, or those moves that I'm making on the left hand side, that would be a high block. That would be more of a low pull. Low pull, high block, high block, low pull. So if you can control the lead shoulder, now I want you doing it with the trail foot drawn back, because I want the shaft to continue to get deeper from P4 to P5. Now if I got you working on this without the trail foot drawn back, I would very quickly see that shaft steepening again in transition, and that's not what I want. I want you to keep the arms in whilst working the lead shoulder down in transition. Run that through a few times for you. Lead shoulder down, keeping the arms in. Lead shoulder down, keeping the arms in. Shaft at mid bicep. And that should be your focal point. So you're still continuing to work on the same basic drill. Still continuing to keep the wrist action to a minimum. You need to appreciate that now you're able to rotate more during the backswing. You've got to get the feel for extending and side bending sufficiently to offset that, so that no one of those three pieces dominates the proceedings. And the way to do that is to put the shaft on the ground and feel like you're turning over the top of that shaft, as opposed to just drifting sort of away from it slightly, as you were in this most recent footage. Very much not doing that in your original footage, which I liked. I mentioned that I thought your pivoting was really, really good. It just needed some additional work doing to it. So stance a little bit wider, make the turn in a more centered manner, keeping the wrist action to a minimum, and then working and understanding what that lead shoulder should be doing. And it's not a bad exercise to cycle between the two like I'm doing here. You know, just before a shot, just sort of what happens, what does that feel like? What does that left shoulder up feel like? What does the left shoulder down feel like? So the trajectory of the lead shoulder in transition is very, very important. If that lead shoulder starts to climb too fast, then you're always going to early extend, struggle to regain flexion, etc., etc. That lead shoulder in transition should be working more level as opposed to up quickly. And that's where your attention needs to be. Keep working on the Boulder Drill with the right foot drawn back. If you've got any questions regarding what I've just discussed in this session, feel free to drop me a message. Keep up the good work.